Fuegoleon is one of the coolest characters in the series, right? Like one of the most respected captains, and today we are going to talk about how you guys should be building him in the game. Now, this is the general pool captain of the Crimson Lion Kings, Fuegoleon Vermilion. This is not the Academy Fuegoleon. There will be a separate video for that, and we want to talk about, what skills you want to upgrade first, what skill cards you should put on him, what gear you should be putting on him, whether or not he's actually worth enhancing, what talents you want to do on his talent tree, and then of course what teams he is going to fit well on for both PvE and PvP. So let's start by talking about his passive you unlock upon reaching LR, and it is when using skill 2, inflicts 1 instance of continuous burn damage for 2 turns, which is nice. That is a guaranteed burn when using skill 2. And skill 2 is an AoE attack, so that is a guaranteed burn on the whole enemy team, which is insanely good when you think about pairing this guy with someone like Leopold, who can do a lot of damage when the opponent is already burning, right? So that's really, really good. His skill 1 is called Ray of Extinction. If enemy is taking continuous damage, attacks after granting a 30% increased damage dealt buff. So if the enemy is burning, in other words, then you get an extra 30% damage on this skill with a attack of 105% and a magic attack of 105% already. It's actually a fairly decent skill 1 when it comes to damage. For skill 2, it's called Onslaught of the Flame Lion. Once again, it is an AoE 70% chance to inflict burn on an enemy, dealing continuous damage for 2 turns. So you get a guaranteed stun with the passive, plus another 70% chance to inflict a burn, and then attacks after granting an increased penetration level 2 buff. Increased penetration, you only get this part if you have his skill card, so keep that in mind. You won't have that if you don't have his skill card, but what that's going to do is it increases your penetration by 40%, allowing you to bypass some of their endurance and get more damage in, which is nice. So that's actually really, really good. And then for his special skill, it's called Leo Rugians. I'm not sure how he actually says it. And then if an enemy is taking continuous damage, attacks after granting a 40% increased damage dealt buff. This is a single target attack, and then inflicts burn on an enemy, dealing continuous damage for 2 turns. Okay, so that's a guaranteed burn as well, which is really good. I think the 40% damage is great, but it gets even better when you upgrade the skill, because if you get the skill to level 5, then you have increased damage dealt plus 20%. So that goes from a 40% increased damage dealt to a 60% buff, which is insanely good. Not to mention they're also taking burn damage this whole time, which is 20% of your attack and 20% of your magic attack at the start of a turn. Okay, so that's really, really good. Now, in terms of upgrade priority, I would definitely go with this skill first if you can get it to level 5, because that's going to increase your overall damage, allowing you to nuke a little bit better against bosses. He's actually a fairly strong green character. He's never going to be able to hit like Raya levels of damage, but he is a pretty decent option. Okay, and then I would go for skill 2, since it is AoE and you have the penetration, which is really nice, and the guaranteed burn on skill 2. And then of course, last but not least, I would go skill 1, which still is actually fairly decent for a skill 1. I feel like Fuegoleon is just the better version of Leo. That's kind of my opinion. And then if we look at his combo skill here, he does have one with Nozel, but without Nozel, if an enemy is afflicted with a debuff, attacks after granting a 30% increased damage dealt buff. I mean, that's okay. It's not great. Like, a lot of times you will be debuffed in PvP, but I feel like more often than not, you're just not going to use this, because why take the 30% damage increase when you could have a potentially 60% damage increase, right? And this is only 60% on attack and magic attack, whereas this one is 150%. Like, you're going to be using the special skill more often than not, so I wouldn't really worry about upgrading the combo attack for this combined attack. But then if we look at Nozel, upon landing a crit, inflicts 3 layers of burns on an enemy, which is insane, and then dealing continuous damage for 2 turns, and then inflicts a reduced endurance level 3 debuff on the enemy for 2 turns, which reduces their endurance by 35%, allowing your penetration to do even more damage, like on your skill 2 or your special skill, which could potentially actually be really good. Now, the one thing I will say about this right here is upon landing a crit, inflicts 3 layers of burns. If we look at his crit rate, it's only 15%. So like, your chances of actually landing a crit aren't that good unless you're like adding on crit gear or like a crit skill card. So it's really not that good of a combined attack for that reason, but the reduced endurance actually might make it worth it, because then you're going to be able to hit harder later on. And then if we were to look at like Nozelle's side of the attack, oh, where's Nozelle? He's above him. Okay, look over here. So Nozelle, when landing a crit, inflict poison on all enemies for 2 turns, which is more continuous damage, right? So you have poison and you also have the burn, which is cool. And then 65% chance to inflict an incapacitate level 3 debuff on the enemy for 2 turns. So that could be really good as well. So I would say the combo attack actually is more like, even though it's an AoE attack, I would say it's more of like a debuff for certain bosses. And this is something you want to use on bosses because you have the incapacitate, you have the poison, and you have the burn. And then you could be using the combo attack. But just in general for the character Fuegoleon, I do still kind of stick with the do special skill, do secondary skill, do primary skill, and then start working on your combo skill. Because as you upgrade the combo skill, it does increase your damage dealt on the regular, and then over here it just scales though. Okay, so it's not really going to change anything right here, so you don't necessarily need to upgrade the combo skill to get these effects of reduced endurance and burns and stuff like that. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm at with the upgrade priority for Fuegoleon. Now let's talk about his skill cards. So like I said, for this skill card, it gives you the additional effect of penetration on skill 2. But then if you look at the passive, it's actually really good. Grants 12% increased damage dealt when HP is equal to 50% or higher. That is very solid in terms of just an overall damage skill card. That's what you're going to want on him, is extra damage, so that is perfect for his build. And then as for other skill cards you could be running, you could run Fauna skill card Blazing Hate. And so what this one does is it applies a 10 to 20% increased all attack to yourself. That is attack and magic attack, meaning your burn is going to do more and you're going to do more damage overall. So that's a really good option. It obviously works for Fauna too, because Fauna does the same things as Fuegoleon with the burning. And then Breath of Darkness is another solid option, free-to-play option. Everybody gets this one. Applies 10 to 20% of increased all attack to yourself. So just increasing your attack and magic attack. Also, once again, very good for Fuegoleon. And then you could also run Breath of Flame in PvE content specifically, where attacks after applying a 12 to 24% increased damage to yourself upon attacking a boss. This is also a very good skill card for PvE. So those are kind of your options for skill cards on Fuegoleon. And then as for gear, what should you be running on him? You could run technically magic attack or attack on him either way. I think magic attack is more the way to go and the way I would go on him. And so if you look at my gear, I literally just copied this over from Leopold. This is the gear I used on Leopold. Leopold and Fuegoleon have very similar gear builds. Okay, so you're going to go for magic attack. And I do have an attack piece of gear there. I have an attack piece of gear here. The rest of them should be magic attack. Ideally, I reroll. I get a magic attack piece of gear later on when I go and farm out some more gears. I just did not have any magic attack bags or these items right here. And so your main stat you're going for though, magic attack, you can see my magic attack is increased by 6,439. And you're going to go for 3 sets of gear on this character. So the first set of gear you want is the Ancient Mage's Relic set. You want 2 pieces of that gear. So the bag and the staff that I have on him makes up that set, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to give him attack plus 220 and magic attack plus 220, which is helpful. And then you also are going to want the gold version of the attack set, okay, where it's going to give you attack plus 7% and magic attack plus 7%. This comes from the Ominous gear. And so I have the Ominous Whip and the Ominous Crystal equipped to Fuegoleon. And once again, if you don't know what a gold gear set is, over here you have your normal gear sets, you have attack, you have defense, you have HP, you have mobility, so on and so forth, right? And then if you look over here, they have a gold star on them, attack, defense, HP, mobility. These just mean they give a percentage. Percentages are always better than just a flat stats boost like you saw on this gear set right here where it just does plus 220. And this one does percentage. Percentage is always going to be better, so try to get gold sets on your characters if you can. And then you are also going to want a gold set of penetration gear, because that's going to increase your penetration by 7, which is nice, and it's going to let you overall do more damage. So that's kind of what you want on Fuegoleon to maximize his damage. Once again, same gear as Leopold. They're very similar builds. They're very similar characters. Once again, I think Fuegoleon is just the better version of Leo. And if we go ahead and take a look at his enhancement levels, should you guys be enhancing him or not? So for at enhancement level 2, grants 3.5% increased damage dealt when attacking an enemy affected by penetration plus 5% and burn. This is actually really good. It's just the better version of Leo. I still stand by it. I know I'm saying that a lot. But then at level 5, grants 7% increased damage dealt when attacking an enemy affected by penetration plus 10% and burn. So there you go. Pretty decent. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you know, enhancing him. If you get the dupes, it is kind of worth putting them into him to get to level 2 at least. But then beyond that, I don't know that it's necessarily worth it to get to level 5. And as far as just enhancing him in general, I don't think it's necessary to use versatile mage pieces. I don't think it's really necessary to even use extra copies. You could probably sell them for other characters who are going to be more beneficial to you. I think just having a copy of him is more than enough. But if you are looking for him to be like your main damage against a boss, I guess you could enhance him. But like I said, I don't feel like he's ever going to be like Raya levels of damage when you're looking at this character. So he's never going to be that crazy of a nuker for PvE. So I wouldn't really worry too much about enhancing him. As for talents, you're just going to want the basic talents. So you're going to want the attack talent, and you're also going to want the damage dealt talent to give him the most amount of damage. You're not really going to want crit damage because he doesn't have great crit rate. And I mean, you could always go for the boss attack, but that's like only if you're really taking on PvE. And then you could go for magic attack as your other one, right? So magic attack and boss, but like it's just not really necessary. And increasing attack isn't a big deal. Like you might be like, well, why don't you want to increase magic attack? Well, the burn scales off attack and magic attack, so increasing attack is good, but the main thing you want is the damage dealt overall. So that's kind of why you go for this build on the talent tree with Fuegoleon. And then as for defense, you just want the defense plus 20%, and then you want the grants defense plus 4% and crit resist plus 2% at the start of a wave, stacks up to 5 times. Those are the best defense slots. I wouldn't really worry about the others. They're not going to be anything too crazy that are going to help you out a lot. And then for support, you can either go for swiftness or you can go for the AoE chance to get your skill 2 back faster. I prefer the guaranteed getting your special back faster because your special is so strong on this character, so I would go for swiftness. And then of course your second option is pretty much always going to be damage resist. These 3 right here are just the best options when it comes to the support talent tree. You could always go for HP recovered, but you don't want that on this type of character. You could go for debuff immunity, but don't want that on this character either. Accuracy and penetration is definitely an option you could actually go for on Fuegoleon here. And you could run it with the Mage's Blessing, so here's another option you could do. But just in general, these are kind of your 3 main options. I'd probably go for these 2 here, but you could definitely go for these 2 if you wanted to. And then as for teams that you could put him on, let's go ahead and take a look at the different teams and options for PvE and PvP. So if we go to Manage Team, Team 5 here, I have a PvE team set up. This is the same exact team I did show for Leopold's Guide, okay? And the reason that I'm showing it again is just because they work so well together, right? We have a burn here, we have a burn here, we have a burn here. She has lifesteal, he has lifesteal. He's the only one who doesn't have lifesteal, but then you have Charmy with her continuous healing on top of these 2 having lifesteal. It's really freaking nuts and actually pretty good for PvE content. And then as far as PvP goes, this is kind of a team that you could run in PvP right now and probably do decent with. So you have Voltos for speeding you up. This is an all green team, right? Then you have Fuegoleon for the main attack, and even if he doesn't kill an enemy, like let's say because he's a green attacker, right, you're going to struggle against the Red Noel, who's rough. But Julius, on the other hand, you could attack, and even if you don't kill him, you can burn him, and then he might die. Granted, he does have his revive, which makes him kind of hard to go against, but then you could attack Charmy. The blue Charmy is pretty meta right now. So there's lots of options for him to attack besides the Red Noel. So he could do okay. And then in the meantime, while your burn is proccing and burning the enemies, right, then you have Radies and you have Mimosa to keep you alive. Radius for the barrier and then Mimosa for the heal. So this is a pretty decent all green team that you could run. In place of Mimosa, you could actually just run the Red Noel with this team, and this team might even work better because then you have barrier, you have a little bit more attack, counter attack, and this team could work very well with Fuegoleon as well if you happen to have him and you're missing like the more meta Julius. Julius would obviously be the better replacement for Fuegoleon here, but this is a team you could run that could work with him. So hopefully that helps you guys out. Those are kind of some team ideas for both PvE and PvP. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider going down there, hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and thank you guys so much.